Hello, everyone. We are moving into week 2 of strategy and leadership. We start to get serious about our exploration of strategy within organizations this week. Um, One of the things before we start talking about week 2, I just wanted to go back and say thank you for posting all of your introductions in the Moodle forum last week. It's really rewarding for me to go through those, see where all of you are in your MPA journeys as well as your career journeys. I also, it was good to see that a lot of you had already made connections with each other in previous classes, and so more of that will happen this semester as well. You'll get to know folks even though we're doing this from a distance. So thank you. This week we get to know each other a little bit better as well through some Zoom conferences. So we'll be doing those on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So again, thank you for signing up for those. Those conferences are really designed for you to ask any questions you have. Make sure that you are clear on sort of what the course is about. I think in particular, I'm interested in making sure you feel comfortable with the project, the strategy project that we'll be doing for the semester. And if you have any questions about grading, those sorts of things, we can address those in our conferences. So look forward to that. There's 2 readings this week as we start to get into the content of the course. I'm having you read the introduction to the Rummelt book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And then I have a supplemental reading from Henry Mintzberg called The Fall and Rise of Strategic Planning. You'll see some common themes within these 2. You'll see that both of them are somewhat critical of what I think we would typically think of as the traditional strategic planning approaches that most organizations take. And so I think they're really good readings to kind of set up where we're heading for the semester, maybe inspire you a little bit. One of the things I wanted to talk about in particular is related to the Mintzberg article is he talked about the distinction between strategic planning and strategic thinking. And I struggle with this class because I think the official title is strategic planning. But what I really am trying to push all of you to do is think of it more in terms of strategic thinking, and think in terms of what that means. I think one of the things that's important to understand is in the Mintzberg article, he talks about strategic thinking is really about synthesis. And so I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the difference between analysis and synthesis. Both of these processes are really important to strategy, but it's important to know how they're different. And so analysis really is it's reductionist. It is really about breaking down. I mean, we use that term a lot. We're breaking down the big complexity of an organization or of a problem to its component parts, trying to understand specifically what those parts do in isolation from each other. And sort of I think the conventional wisdom is that if you can understand all of the component parts, then you can understand the whole. I use this image. This is sort of what it looks like. You'll recognize I use this image as well when I talk about organizational structure and the hierarchies. Synthesis, on the other hand, is it's a holistic approach. It is looking at not just the big picture, but it's looking at how all of the individual parts of the system or the organization or the problem that you're addressing are connected. It's really important that the relationships are what's the focus of synthesis, more so than what the individual parts do. How do they interact with each other? How do they influence each other? And so this picture looks a little bit more like this. So like I said, both of these types of thinking are really critical when it comes to the strategy process. But I think what we've typically seen is that most strategy really falls more heavily on the analysis side and sort of ignores, overlooks the value and the processes that are part of synthesis. I think I mentioned, I was part of the university strategic planning process just 2 or 3 years ago, and we spent a lot of time. We spent about 6 months gathering a lot of data, a lot of input, a lot of stories from people. We did a lot of analysis in that process, but one of the things that we felt was important was to, again, sort of understand, what were those relationships? What was the big picture? What were we trying to accomplish? We did that by looking at sort of the themes that emerged from all of our data gathering. And so one of the things that I did is I worked with a couple of folks and we produced this graphic. And I'm sure as you look at this for the first time, it's like pretty overwhelming. And what does all of that mean? And that was sort of the reaction that our strategic planning group had with it immediately as well. But what this attempts to do is to take all of these themes and sort of present them in a hierarchy in terms of, the bigger orange ones are the really overarching themes that we saw. The smaller circles that are green sort of represent secondary themes that emerged. And then the other ones are kind of third level themes. Well, what we really wanted to do was, again, see what the relationship was between these various themes. How are they connected to each other? So what I experienced, I created a large poster size image of this and put it up on the wall. And it took a little while for people to sort of absorb what it meant. But the interesting thing was that the conversations that emerged from this picture were very different than they would have been, I think, if we had produced this. And one of the examples I like to share is that we had one of our members of the strategic planning group who was in our research wing of the university. In fact, he was our vice president of research. And so, on one end of this, he was very interested in, this obviously the research and creative processes that go on at the university, and how those can drive the economy, how the university can be an economic engine for the state and for the region. On this end, he's very interested in innovation, and he was interested in, those sorts of things that were sort of out here on the fringes. But what he was also sort of critical of our focus on liberal arts. And you can see the liberal arts thing kind of shows up here in the middle. And what was interesting was to see how the conversation sort of changed when he was confronted with the fact that all of these things do have a relationship. And it just raised more questions, raised some really interesting conversations. So I just thought I would share this as one example of a way that a strategic planning group tried to approach that synthesis process. And in my experience, it did create a very different sort of process of gaining some new insights and fresh perspectives, and then helping in the creative process of generating some paths forward. So I wanted to just share a few of my favorite quotes from these two readings this week, and then that'll be it. I'm not going to talk for a long time this week, but I really enjoyed this quote from the Mintzberg article. Strategy making is an immensely complex process which involves the most sophisticated, subtle, and at times subconscious elements of human thinking. So, what we're going to be talking about this semester, like I said, is really focusing on the thinking side of it, the creative side of it, of strategy, going beyond just, taking a template that has been set out for, we need to do our mission, and we need to do our vision, and we need to do our values, and we need to do goals, and those sorts of things. Those are important parts of the process, but as he said, it's really complex. This gets into, like I said, the creative side of it that I think we'll have some fun exploring this semester. Strategy making needs to function beyond the boxes. That's, like I said, going beyond sort of just filling in the blanks in a template. To encourage the informal learning that produces new perspectives and new combinations. So one of the themes that you'll see as we go through this course is we'll talk about the need for organizations to be more adaptive to, we're dealing with an incredibly rapid pace of change in the external environment. And so how do organizations go about adapting to that and keeping up with that, with new expectations and new challenges, new threats from the outside world. And the answer to that really is that organizations have to become much better at learning and adapting faster. And so this idea here of strategy as really an important part of the learning of an organization, I think is key to what I want to get across this semester. A few quotes from the Rummelt readings. The core of strategy work is always the same, discovering the critical factors in a situation and designing a way of coordinating and focusing actions to deal with those factors. So, Rummelt really starts to get into the down and dirty of strategy. It's about focusing on your most immediate needs and how to solve those, how to move forward, how to adapt and learn. He really talks about strategy as a sort of a scientific process. A little bit later on in the book, we'll read about that. But his thinking is that strategy is, it's a scientific process. You start with the strategy itself being a hypothesis, and the execution being the experimentation that goes on. And from that, again, the results are something that you're going to learn from. And he'll talk about, good leaders take advantage of that. They take advantage of that learning, what works and what doesn't work, and then apply that to continued focus on the next set of strategies, the next hypothesis. He'll talk a lot about bad strategy. He says this in the introduction: the bad strategy skips over the pesky details. He talks about bad strategy really being focused on goal setting rather than problem solving. And one of the reasons we do that, he says, it ignores the power of choice and focus, trying instead to accommodate a multitude of conflicting demands and interests. And I suspect you've probably seen that in organizations that you are involved in, is that the politics get involved and interests within the organization get involved. And that's one of the biggest challenges that organizational leaders face is good strategy is typically going to have winners and losers within an organization to some degree. It's going to have to take a lot of courage to, advance one cause over another one within an organization. And so we'll explore that as we go on in the semester. So again, just sort of in a nutshell, good strategy honestly acknowledges the challenges being faced and provides an approach to overcoming them. And so that's really what we're going to focus on in our organizational strategy project that you'll work on this semester. He talks about good strategy having an essential logical structure that he calls the kernel, and that contains three things: a diagnosis, a guiding policy, and a coherent action. And so, again, it's part analysis, it's part synthesis, it's part being a scientist where you are analyzing, but it's also part being a designer where you're creating new ideas. So I think it's going to be a fun semester. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. Again, I look forward to having our conversations in person this week where we can talk a little bit more about this, and have a good week. Thanks, everyone.